Welcome to Part 4 of the Argumentative Research Unit with English 1010E at Southern Utah University. We're working now on writing a causes paper. Previously, you created a causes research matrix. The goal of the causes paper is to help you first summarize the problem and its negative effects, then identify and explain the causes of the problem. As you do that, make sure that you use sources to support your reasons and examples. We can think about the problem with this diagram here. In the first part of this causes paper, you're going to do the right side of the diagram, where you quickly summarize the problem and its main negative effects. A lot of this information can come from your classmates' paper if they have effectively outlined the effects of the problem. Your main job in this paper is to do the left side of the diagram, where you explain to the reader the different causes that have created the problem in the first place. There may be 1, 2, 3, 4, or more problems. It'll all depend on what you've learned from your sources. If we think of an example, we can look to the example problem paper about the low water levels on the lake. In the beginning of that paper, the author summarizes the main negative effects on people's ability to do boating, shipping, and the impact on plants and animals, or the wildlife. But then the majority of the paper focuses on the left side of this diagram, where the author explains that some people think that one of the causes is government draining of the lake into a nearby lake, and evaluates that problem and says whether or not there's enough evidence to suggest that it really did create the low water levels. Then the author examines another possible cause, which is the creation of human structures and cities and towns along the lake, and whether they are using the water from the lake. Lastly, the author examines a third possible cause, which is a natural drought, a lack of sufficient rain and snowfall that is resulting in the low water levels. With each of those three causes, the author provides sources that evaluate and support the explanation of each cause, and then concludes the paper by letting the reader know what the evidence suggests as the main or most important causes that created the problem. So this is what you will do with your paper. In each body paragraph or section, you need to identify the cause you're going to focus on. Explain how that helped create the problem. So in the case of the example of the low water levels, the author had to explain how the low water levels were created by a lack of rain and snowfall. And so the author explained this process of how rain and snow fall, they create a snowpack, and then naturally this melts and fills the water. And if there isn't enough rain and snowfall in the winter, then we don't get very deep water levels in the spring and summer. The author also needs to evaluate the severity and reliability of this information. So, for example, the cause about the government draining the lake water into a nearby lake, the author found evidence to suggest that even though people believed this was true, there was no official evidence to suggest that it's actually true. And so the author explained it, but then said, but this is probably not really a main cause. It is probably not even true. So please go ahead and look at the example causes paper. There's a good example about the lake. There's another example that has some issues and some problems, and that's actually really helpful to look at because it can help you see some areas where you might make mistakes and you could avoid the problems in the poor paper. We've been talking about one of the important parts of the argumentative research unit is to help us develop argumentative research skills, which are really important for university study. These skills include things like critical thinking. Can we understand what creates a problem and how a problem is solved? And also research and analysis. Can we effectively use sources to support and explain problems. And as we've talked about, we're also working on audience awareness as we read our classmates' paper and we give our classmates feedback on the effectiveness of their writing. As we look at these research skills, one of the things we have to do is use in-text citations. Now, let's talk about this word citation. It exists both as a verb, which means to cite, okay, and that means to refer to an information source. So we're talking about information we got from a source. Beware, this word sounds the exact same, but it has different spelling than another word called cite. And that kind of cite means a location. So we're not talking about the S cite, we're talking about the letter C cite. The noun form is citation, and a citation is an information source reference. So it's something that usually exists in a speech or a paper that has made reference to some source. We have talked previously about the need to have both end-of-text references or citations and in-text references or citations. So the end-of-text citations is the works cited list, and we worked on that before, and you can see an example of one on the left part of your screen. On the right part of the screen we have some sentences that have in-text citations. Let's look at those a little more closely. So if you look at the colored phrases that have been highlighted on the right side of the screen, we see, for instance, Stephen points out that a low-carb diet has some benefits. The Stevens points out that is a phrase that signals the reader that this is a citation, that this information comes from a source. Here's another example in the blue text. According to Gorley, many people start a diet that poses serious health risks. Okay. So Gorley is the name of an author. In fact, we can see that author on the left side of the screen. Okay, it's the fifth source down. And that is an in-text reference, okay, that tells the reader this information in the sentence is coming from the source. You can find that source and all of its detailed information at the end of the text in the works cited list. But rather than copy the whole citation and put it in our paragraph in the middle of the paper, instead we just use short phrases like according to Gorley. Okay. There's a third way to do this. Instead, you could just provide a normal sentence, okay, and then at the end of the sentence, in parentheses, those rounded lines, you can put the name of the author or authors. So, for example, our second source in the works cited list is Kontuga Nancy, Yvonne Tapper, Gardzina, and Connie E. Vickery. Those three authors, Kotunga, Tapper, Gardzina, and Vickery, are put in parentheses at the end of the sentence, and that lets the reader know that the information in the sentence right before comes from those authors. So those are three different ways that the writer can signal to the reader information in this sentence comes from a source. It's supported by a source. And if you want to know more information about that source, go to the works cited list, look for the name of the author, and you will see it. So when we use an in-text citation, often what we do is a paraphrase or a summary. So we use the name of the author and then we say what that a summary or another way of explaining what the author said. So here's our example. Stevens points out that, and then the author had said something that means the same thing as a low-carb diet has some benefits. Okay, so when I paraphrase or summarize, I'm taking the same idea that the author wrote in her paper, but I'm using different words and different grammar to explain that idea. That's different from a quotation. When we use a quotation, we are telling the reader that we are using the exact same words that the author used in their source. So if we look at this one, Stevens points out that, and then now we use open quotation marks, those two little lines above the letter A. This is signaling to the reader all the words that are going to follow these two little lines are the exact same words from the source. So it says a low carbohydrate diet helps people lose weight and keep off that weight in the long term. And then we have here a page number. Okay? So this is a quotation. You can never, ever, ever use the exact same words as a source unless you put them in quotation marks. The open quotation marks right above the A, and then the closed quotation marks at the end of the quote right after the word term. And that lets the reader know everything in the middle are the exact same words from the source. If you use the words from the source, you must put them in quotation marks. If instead you're just going to summarize them, which is what the author has done at the top of this slide, we see a low-carb diet has some benefits. Yeah, they do have some benefits, and that's just a summary of this more detailed information. So you can do it either way. It's best to use paraphrase or summary more frequently because that allows you to practice your English language skills, and it allows you to explain the ideas you've learned in language that your readers can understand. But if you ever do decide you really want to use the words from a source, you must always put them in quotation marks, like the writer has done here. If you don't, it's considered plagiarism. It can have serious consequences for students. They could fail the assignment. They could even fail the course. And I've seen situations where students are kicked out of the university for using plagiarism, which means they did not properly quote their sources. So here's some useful phrases to use when you are doing in-text citations. You can use the one where you say the author says that, or states that, or points out that. Or if there's two authors, you could say X and Y agree that, or argue that, or explain that. Okay? You can also use the phrase according to X, or according to X and Y. When you use the phrase according to X, don't use a verb after it. Don't say according to X he says that. The he says that part is already in, the meaning is inside according to X. Okay? So you just repeat it. You just follow according to X with a phrase that explains what the idea is. So I might say, according to Smith, smoking is bad for your health. Okay? I would never do according to X, he says that smoking is bad for your health. I don't need the he says part. Okay? The other option here, as we can see in sort of this green color, is write a summary of what the source says, and then in parentheses put the name of the author. And that lets the reader know that all the ideas in that sentence come from that author or that group of authors, if you want to write down two names. So your goal from last week was to create a causes research matrix. You found your peers' paper and at least 3 other sources. You identified what they had to say about the problem, the effects, and what they may have said about the causes. Now you're going to take that outline and or the matrix and create your outline. And every time you plan your outline, you must make sure that you have at least one source that supports each paragraph. So I have an introduction that I'm going to start with. I'm going to explain what the problem is. I'm going to summarize the main negative effects. A lot of that's going to come from my peers' paper, but it might also come from some other sources. Okay? And then I'm going to have my thesis statement. And in my thesis statement, I'm going to say, here are the main causes, A, B, and C. And then I'll probably start talking about cause A. I'll explain what the cause is and how it connects to the problem. If I have sources that support that connection, I'll cite them. And then I'll evaluate the cause. Do I think that this is a serious cause? Do I think that this is a true cause? Is there enough evidence to show that it's a strong thing and it's not just a misunderstanding or misinformation? And then I will repeat that process for all the other causes that I have, making sure that each time I have at least one source that supports that information. At the end, I'll write my conclusion where I'll restate my thesis statement. I'll summarize those main causes again, and then maybe I'll suggest that we really do need to find solutions to this problem in just one kind of sentence. So that's our goal for this week. You need to develop an outline based on the research matrix that you have already completed. Then you're going to make sure that each of your body paragraphs is supported by sources from your research matrix. And then finally, you'll use that outline to write your causes paper, and then you'll submit it through Canvas. Please contact your instructor if you have any questions about this process. You can contact your instructor through Canvas or email. Good luck.